So the last step in this process is to ink the drawing, to sharpen it up, make it crisp, make it look really clean. With technical pens, you will find that they come in different sizes. So, for example, in microns, if you have a 01, that's a 0.25 millimeter. If you've got an 02, that's 0.3 millimeter. And this is just the width of that nib. So, as you're inking, you can keep a consistent line weight depending on what pen you're using. For our intents and purposes, we're going to want the lines that are closest to us to be a little bit heavier and thicker. Lines that are further away, or those hidden lines, we want to be a thinner nib, not to have as much presence. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start from the front to back, just because it'll make it a little bit easier. Once you put in those heavier front lines, it really makes it easier to say, okay, these other lines are hidden, and to not overdo them. If you start from the back and work forward, you may accidentally put a heavy solid line where you don't intend it to be. So I would suggest going from front to back, work with a bit wider nib. Always use your straight edge. You can turn that triangle and use it like a ruler. Use the edge of that triangle as you retrace all the lines. Don't try to freehand at the end to make it work. A problem that you may encounter is if you're going back over a line and you want to beef it up, you can kind of move your straight edge a little bit to double up that line. What this has a tendency to do is sometimes you can get a tapering line, or you'll get like a little white gap in between. This is something that you don't want to rush. This is the last step. You put in all this effort working with pencil, you've erased stuff. So take your time and do a nice slow job. I'm rushing through this a little bit to get through all these demos, but this is one of those things where if you take your time at the end, make sure that straight edge is going in the right direction so you don't get these strange divergent angles. You'll really be pleased with it at the end. Another thing about working fairly slowly to do the inking part of it is, and microns and some of your better technical pens like Copics, if you drag the straight edge across it, they won't smear. If you use a cheaper pen, sometimes you'll end up dragging your straight edge and it'll smear. So another reason to work slow is that you can it allows the ink a little bit more time to dry. Here at the end, I've done a decent job, but I see areas like, especially in the line where the mass, those heavy lines in the mass are just a little bit too heavy in comparison to everything else. And at the end, the nice thing about these technical pens is you can use your white eraser, go in there and erase out all the line work that you had before. If I had to do it over again, I would probably slow down a bit and not spend so much time going back over that area with the mass. I would like for that front edge of that plane to be a little bit beefier than the stuff that's around the mass contours. Last step down here at the bottom, I'm making two little rectangular boxes, and you're going to put your name and whether it is plane dominant, mass dominant, or beam dominant. Some people may say, well, this doesn't really look like it's plane dominant. It looks like the mass is pretty dominant. Two things to consider. If your one form is the connecting form between the two other forms, like in this case, the plane acts as a connector between the beam and the mass, we're going to say that that is plane dominant. It has to be there to make this work. Another aspect could be scale. So in that circumstance, you might have an extremely, in that case, you may have an extremely large plane or an extremely large mass or beam that just kind of overshadows the other two elements to make it more dominant. Once it's inked and you've erased it and it looks nice and clean, this is ready to go and document and get added to the critique.